Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, I'm finally getting around to the third volume in Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, The Queen of the Damned, published in 1988. Part 1. A complex, structured narrative. So even though The Queen of the Damned picks up right from where the previous novel left off, it is a very different novel from The Vampire Lestat. One thing that I mentioned both in my previous review of The Vampire Lestat and also with Interview the Vampire is that those novels are character-based. They oftentimes do have a plot, but it's very much secondary to the characters, and we mainly focus on developing the psychology of characters and how they're reacting to the different environments that they find themselves in, as opposed to working with a tightly structured, clear plot. In Interview the Vampire, I did point out that this is a bit of a problem, mostly because the character of Louis just wasn't the best character to follow, or at least the most interesting, whereas in The Vampire Lestat, the character work was great, and it made that a great novel. But with The Queen of the Damned, Rice drops that character focus and decides instead to focus on the plot. So she's changing things up a bit, and I think that works in this novel's favour. We have Lestat's arc, we have Akasha's arc, and then we also have, in the first volume of the book, the mini-arcs of several different characters, which all come to converge with the other two arcs and each other as the novel progresses, leading to a really great climax at the end. All of these arcs and how they come together is crafted really well, and you can tell this when you're reading it. In fact, I actually seem to remember listening to an interview or watching an interview where someone asked her how she writes, and she said that oftentimes she doesn't plan things, but The Queen of the Damned was one book where she actually did do more planning than usual, and it definitely shows and is something you'll notice when you read this book. I really enjoyed the structure of this book and how everything came together. I also think that it was a nice change from the previous two books, which were more character-based. It gave something fresh to the series, which is always good, especially when you're, getting more into the series with your third book. Obviously, if you prefer character-based novels, you might find this to be less good than The Vampire Lestat. But hopefully not, because I think it's not that the character work isn't still there, it's just that it's taking a slight backseat, and there's more focus on the plot this time around. Part 2. Characters, new and old. So The Queen of the Damned introduces some familiar faces from the previous two books, like Louis, Armand, Gabrielle, but it also introduces a lot of new faces, especially in that first volume when we follow many different characters, and a lot of them are new to us at this point. Now, I do think that first volume, in terms of the plot, is very clever. You have all these different characters, and they are doing seemingly completely different things, but they're all unified by having this dream about these two red-headed twins that suffer this, I won't spoil it, but this tragedy, and they're all having this dream, and that will slowly bring them together, and then by the end of the novel, that dream and all of this is explained. I think that is really smart, and that's done really well. But in terms of the characters themselves, there are a couple of storylines here and there that are not particularly interesting, either because the character themselves just isn't all that fun to follow, or because the plot that they're, the stuff that they're doing just isn't that interesting. Or because, there's other characters like Lestat who is doing stuff and you want to read up on those characters. You don't necessarily want to know about these people who you haven't really invested in at that point. On that note, I'd also like to point out a little disappointment that I had when reading this book, which was that I really thought we were going to have more of some of those older faces. I was expecting, because Gabrielle and Louis returned at the end of the last book, that they would take on a big role in this book, and we spend a lot of time with them and Lestat building their relationship, seeing how they've changed over the years, and they did get a decent amount of screen time, or page time if you like, but they didn't get that much, and that's partly because most of that first volume was devoted to these secondary characters. So for me, I did find that a bit disappointing, because I did want to hear more from these older characters, and that did disappoint me a little bit, but again, I think my overall enjoyment of this book probably trumps all that anyway. Part 3. A Grand Mythology. I would say that the main theme, or the main subject of The Queen of the Damned, is the mythology of the vampires, which is something that Rice has been slowly building up on in the previous two books, especially the last book, The Vampire Lestat. And it's something that comes to full fruition in this novel. It's in The Queen of the Damned when we finally get answers to where the vampires come from, who Akasha and Enkil are, and all of that stuff. We'll get to learn all of that here. Now, Rice's mythology for the vampires is something that I've praised her about since doing my first review of this series. I think it's fresh, I think it's original, I like how she ties it to Egyptian mythology, and I like how just unexpected and different it is. It's definitely something that even now still stands out among all the different kinds of vampire mythologies. When I was doing a bit of research on this book and other people's views on it, some people did actually complain about this book because of the focus on the mythology. They didn't like how Rice explained everything, but I actually think I disagree. I think it was great to finally learn about where vampires come from, because it's something that she's been teasing about for a long time, and it's great to actually see the picture that she built in her head about the vampires. And again, because it's such an interesting, different mythology, it's not something that I would even think to complain about. In fact, I think this is the aspect of the book that I find most enjoyable. So yeah, for me, the revelations here are fantastic, and if you enjoy world building and people who do interesting things with old material, like vampires who, a creature that's been done a lot, then I think you'll find a lot to enjoy here. Part 4. A somewhat anticlimactic ending. So, the ending of The Queen of the Damned is a bit of a mixed bag. There are some really good parts, and then there's one pretty bad part, so let's go through them. First of all, I like how all of the characters converge in their various storylines in the final volume. They all come together and begin to unpack the vampire mythology, to confront Akasha. All of that stuff I think is great. The scenes with these characters talking to each other is fantastic. There's a lot of tension, especially in the background when you're also seeing what Akasha is doing and what her plan is. All of that stuff, fantastic. I also think Akasha's plan is a great plan. Not that I agree with it, but just that I like it. I did read, when I was researching this, some criticism of Akasha, and in particular her plot. And I disagree with that criticism. The criticism basically said that her ideas were unmotivated, or they weren't consistent with her character because she's the embodiment of all the qualities that she allegedly despises. But I think that is exactly why it works. The whole point of Akasha is that she's meant to be delusional and crazy, and essentially a hypocrite. She wants to deny people certain things, certain qualities, and at the same time she wants to keep those things for herself. And I think that if you do a close reading of that, that's something that makes sense, and is also a quality of some of the best villains. The best villains aren't just evil because they're evil. They think in their own warped minds that what they're doing is right, that it's just, and that's why they have this strong passion and they're able to just carry out atrocities. And that's exactly what Akasha is like. That's psychology, that's how she works. And for me, that not only did it make sense, but it was also a very interesting villain overall. I liked the plan, I liked how she engaged with the other vampires in discussing her plan and the philosophy, and watching them slowly just pick away at her arguments, because they were pretty bad arguments for what she was trying to do. So yeah, I thought that was great, I thought that the plan was great, I thought Akasha was a great villain, and I liked the confrontation scene between her and the other vampires. Unfortunately, when it came down to the climax itself, to the crunch time, that particular scene and how it resolved was just not really that good. It was incredibly quick, it was unexpected but not in a good way, and it was a bit unrealistic in the sense that it was like, really? That easy? That's all it took? Again, I won't spoil exactly how easy whatever the thing was, but the resolution was just a little bit short and didn't satisfy me as a reader. And again, it's something that I've seen other people point out as a problem, that they just thought there would have been a bit more there. So, yeah. The build-up to the climax was great. The climax itself was alright until the final moment, and then it just fell flat on its face a little bit for me. So, hence the title of the section, a bit of an anticlimax. Part 5, Conclusion. So, despite having a few negative things to say about this book, actually The Queen of the Damned is probably my favourite novel in the Vampire Chronicles series so far. The small gripes that I had are really just small gripes, because I think that overall this is a fantastically written piece of work, and again it just shows how much Rice is developing her writing talent as she's going along here. I like how, at least so far, Rice takes all of the elements that work in the previous book, develops those, picks some new things, so in this case the focusing on the plot rather than character, brings those in, and creates something new and fresh every time. and I'm really enjoying reading this series, and I can't wait to read the next book. I appreciated the tightly structured plot, the really good characters, and the development of the vampire mythology. I did find a couple of the storylines in the first volume of the book with the secondary characters less enjoyable, but also not terrible either, and I do wish we'd have had a little bit more time to see characters like Gabrielle and Louis than we actually got in the end. Still though, I think this was a fantastic book, probably my favourite so far, and you should definitely read it if you haven't already. Okay guys, that's it for today's video. Please let me know in the comments below, what do you think of the Queen of the Damned? In particular, what do you think of the climax? Do you think it was a bit anticlimactic, or did you think that you appreciated it, you thought it was good? Love to get your thoughts on that. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Take care guys, and I'll see you all in the next video.